Something happened in Cleveland today that most of the football world is going to miss entirely. Not because the information isn't available, not because the evidence is buried somewhere difficult to find, but because the noise machine that drives mainstream football discourse has a habit, a deeply ingrained, ratings-protecting habit of selecting one thread and pulling it while every other important piece of information falls quietly to the ground where nobody picks it up. Today, that's not happening here. Because what came out of Brown's practice today wasn't just a statistic, a coaching soundbite, or a feel-good story about a young quarterback settling into his professional footing. It was a convergence. Performance data, coaching language, organizational logic, and family dynamics all pointed in the same direction at the same time, creating a picture that is neither subtle nor ambiguous if you're watching with honest eyes and a genuine commitment to following what the evidence actually shows, rather than what the most comfortable narrative has been insisting for weeks. And that picture looks nothing like what a significant chunk of the media has been selling you. So we're building this from scratch, every layer, every detail, every implication. Because by the time we're done here, you're going to see the complete version, the analytically honest, organizationally sound, and factually grounded image of what is genuinely unfolding inside that Cleveland building. Not the filtered version, not the partial view, the real one. Starting exactly where it has to start, with what actually happened on that practice field today. Let's talk numbers first, because performance is the foundation that everything else gets built on top of. Coaching narratives get constructed around it. Organizational decisions get justified through it. The media frames the competition any way it wants, but what matters, what actually happened when these two quarterbacks stepped onto that practice field, with coaches watching and evaluations being recorded, is where this conversation begins. Shedeur Sanders, 7 completions on 15 attempts, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Those are the numbers. They're accurate, they're documented. And before the completion percentage crowd rushes in to minimize what Shedeur did today, we need to address exactly what context those numbers demand, because the completion percentage argument sounds reasonable on the surface, and it completely falls apart the moment you understand what the surrounding facts actually mean. 7 completions on 15 attempts. On its face, that sounds modest. 53% isn't a number that makes highlight reels or generates breathless takes about a quarterback cementing his roster position. But here's what that surface reading deliberately ignores. 3 of those 7 completions were touchdowns. 3 in a competitive practice session against a defense receiving the same level of coaching, preparation, and evaluative intensity as the offense lined up against them. That is not a small thing buried in a practice report you scroll past on your phone. Most starting quarterbacks in the National Football League would genuinely welcome that touchdown rate in a live game environment, let alone in a training camp practice, where defenses are fully installed, fully prepared, and actively trying to expose exactly the kind of decision-making that separates quarterbacks who project as starters from quarterbacks who end up as backups. 3 touchdown passes in that environment reflect a quarterback operating with genuine conviction, not cautious, check-down-first football that pads a completion percentage while contributing almost nothing to winning. Not safe, percentage-protecting decisions that keep stats clean but keep scoreboards empty. Aggressive, decisive, accurate football that prioritizes explosive production, the kind of production that wins games when the lights actually come on. Now put Watson's line next to it, 9 for 17, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. The completion percentage crowd is already pointing at that 9, already framing the larger volume as evidence of an advantage, but that's exactly where honest analysis breaks through comfortable fiction. 1 interception against your own defense in a competitive practice session is not a minor blemish you average out in the final accounting. That interception represents a turnover. The opposing unit gains possession. In any real game translation of what this competition is being evaluated against, that is 6 potential points moving in the wrong direction. And when you're comparing a quarterback who produced 3 touchdowns and protected the football, Against a quarterback who produced 2 touchdowns and surrendered free possession to the defense, on that specific day, in that specific session, the advantage is clear, direct, and completely unambiguous. That is not a controversial take. That is arithmetic. But as important as those statistics are for establishing the foundation, they are not the most significant thing that happened during Shedeur Sanders' practice performance today. Not even close. There was one moment, one specific throw that demands to be isolated, examined, and discussed with the precision and gravity that its execution actually earned. The touchdown pass to Isaiah Bond. Let's give it exactly what it deserves. Isaiah Bond was not interfered with on that pass. That is not a small detail. It is the entire point. The football did not force Bond to redirect, to extend awkwardly, to battle through contact in a contested window, or to make the kind of spectacular athletic catch that makes a receiver look extraordinary while quietly exposing the quarterback for an inaccuracy that made the catch difficult in the first place. None of that happened. Isaiah Bond did not take a single extra step to accommodate an off-target throw. He did not shift his trajectory by even a fraction to reach back for a ball that arrived slightly late or slightly outside his frame. He did not make any bodily adjustment of any kind. The ball hit him in the chest while he was running in full stride. When Bond looked back, the football was already there, precisely on time, precisely on target, delivered at the exact speed and angle that allowed a receiver running a route at full speed to catch a pass from a quarterback who released the football before the route was finished, before Bond himself had fully committed to his break, and still have it arrive in his hands at the exact moment and location that made the catch not just possible, but completely effortless. That is what anticipatory precision looks like when it's working at a high level. This was not a coincidence between a receiver running a clean route and a quarterback getting lucky with a nice release. This quarterback made the decision to let go of the football at a point that required absolute faith. Faith in his receiver to finish the route exactly as designed, and faith in his own internal calculation to place the ball in a location that only his guy could reach. That decision came after reading the coverage before the snap, after identifying the leverage the defender was using, after recognizing where the window would open before it opened, and after committing to an early release that only works if the processing sequence leading up to it is correct. You cannot coach that sequence into a quarterback in a single offseason. You cannot install coverage recognition, pre-snap processing, route anticipation, early release timing, and accurate ball placement through a training camp drill. It does not appear in a player who is guessing, reacting, or mechanically executing. That processing sequence is the product of genuine football intelligence, the result of a mind that deeply understands the geometry of the game and translates that understanding directly into quarterback play that forces defenses to respect every level of the field simultaneously, not just manage the pocket and wait for someone to come open. When a quarterback is processing faster than coverage can rotate, defenders cannot predict where the ball is going before the play develops. That makes him a real threat to every part of a defense at the same time. Very few quarterbacks anywhere in the National Football League can execute that kind of throw. That is not hype talking. That is a straightforward evaluation of what was recorded on camera during that practice session, measured directly against what elite professional quarterbacking actually looks like in real time. And the organizational decision makers inside that Cleveland building cannot afford to overlook what that throw represents when it comes from a 23-year-old who is still early in his professional development, still building the experience that sharpens a quarterback's processing, and still competing for his own team's starting job. Before we get into what the people running that organization should do with everything they're witnessing, and we will get into that with full analytical force, let's hear Shedeur himself describe what shifted internally and what led to the kind of confident, technically clean quarterback play that showed up on that field today, because what he said after practice deserves more weight than the current football conversation is giving it. He talked about his coach. He described how Monken gave him life. He specifically pointed to a conversation in which Monken challenged him directly, identified the standard, named the expectation, and made it plain that performing at the highest level he was capable of reaching required daily commitment to the process, not an occasional commitment when the moment felt big enough to warrant full effort. Daily. Every single session, no skipped steps, no shortcuts, no letting external pressure or the constant noise of a high-visibility competition knock him off the internal discipline that genuine development actually demands. That conversation became a turning point. After hearing it, Shedeur sat with it, processed it, and then identified the specific area that needed work, not in a vague, general sense, specifically. And then he committed to addressing that area methodically, step by step, building momentum as each improvement clicked into place, layering new progress on top of previous gains, drawing energy from each intentional step forward into the next one. Now consider what that response reveals about the kind of quarterback Shedeur Sanders is and what he is becoming. The easy narrative, the one some media voices have been comfortable sitting inside for weeks, frames him as a raw prospect with impressive lineage and a famous last name who needs significant time before becoming a real professional factor. In that version of the story, he is a project with potential rather than a player with genuine current talent, a developmental asset rather than a legitimate competitive option. When you watch a quarterback describe a coaching challenge the way Shedeur described this one, that version of the story does not survive. A player who is purely raw, entirely projectable, and completely dependent on physical gifts that haven't been shaped by actual football intelligence does not hear a challenge about daily discipline and immediately translate it into a specific, targeted, methodical improvement plan. That is not a reactive response. That is not the answer of someone operating on instinct alone. A player with real football maturity responds that way. A player whose internal learning architecture is designed to absorb information quickly, process it accurately, and convert it into measurable improvement on the field. And then he said something that goes even deeper than the explanation of his own development process. He described himself as a relationship-based, said he takes relationships seriously, said the human connection and the coaching bond he has developed with Monken is what unlocks his best performance. That is critical context when evaluating quarterbacks in the National Football League, because the quarterbacks who become franchise pillars are almost always the ones who absorb coaching and apply it with speed and accuracy, who hear what a head coach or offensive coordinator says and process it quickly enough for the relationship to grow rather than stall. When a quarterback tells you that a coaching connection produced his best performance, he is revealing something about his ceiling. He is telling you that when the coaching staff genuinely invests in him, the output rises to match that investment. If today's practice performance is what that investment looks like in a training camp setting, the organization has to be honest with itself about what the answer to that question looks like across a full regular season with real game experience stacked on top of the current developmental foundation. Everyone who has been consuming the media narrative surrounding this quarterback competition and accepting it as a complete, accurate, and unfiltered picture of what is genuinely happening inside that Cleveland building needs to pay very close attention to what Coach Todd Monken said when he addressed the competition publicly today. Because the full picture is not what the public has been seeing, and Monken did not imply that, he stated it directly. Coaches typically use diplomatic softening to manage expectations without revealing strategic information. That is the standard playbook when a head coach speaks publicly about an active competition that hasn't been decided yet. That is not what happened today. What Monken said was explicit. He told anyone listening that the confident public assessments being made about who is winning this competition, the takes being built from practice video clips, the rep counts being cited, the analysts assembling practice footage and sideline observations to declare a winner, every last piece of confident framing has been built on insufficient information. That is not spin from the Sanders camp. That is a straight statement from the head coach conducting the evaluation, the one person in this entire conversation with access to the complete picture that nobody on the outside can see. Every voice that has been speaking with confidence about this competition's outcome should feel a significant amount of humility right now, given the head coach's direct, public confirmation that the external view is incomplete. A carefully curated selection of practice video appears on social media. The rep counts being cited are partial accountings. The observations from media professionals with legitimate physical access are valid but narrowly constrained data points. Constructing a definitive narrative from an incomplete data set and then defending that narrative confidently is not analysis, it is storytelling. And Monken just confirmed on the record that the story being told is missing chapters that the public hasn't seen. Dismissing his remarks as strategic ambiguity is not an intellectually honest response. It is not sufficient to assume he is using careful public language to manage expectations or protect a predetermined outcome. The honest answer is simpler. Take his words at face value, acknowledge the limitations of the external view, and apply appropriate skepticism to every confident take built on information that the head coach himself just told you is incomplete. That is not blind faith in organizational messaging. That is basic intellectual honesty about the boundary of what people on the outside can actually know. And when you combine Monken's acknowledgement of the incomplete outside view with the specific language he chose to describe the current state of this competition, the picture that starts to form looks dramatically different from the one certain media narratives have been promoting. 2 starter-caliber quarterbacks. That is what Monken said. Not a proven starter and a developmental prospect getting valuable reps in preparation for a future role. Not a clear frontrunner and a capable backup earning his way into the conversation. 2 quarterbacks of legitimate starting quality. 1 position available. A genuine, unresolved competition between 2 players who have performed well enough during this evaluation process to be considered real starting options for an NFL offense. That framing is not a throwaway line. The one person in this entire conversation with access to the complete film, the complete practice data, the complete evaluation picture, the picture he just told us the outside world cannot access, is providing the most important characterization of this competition. And when he uses language that places both competitors at a genuine starter caliber level, what he is communicating is that this competition is truly open. Not performatively open to keep both players motivated and competitive, not strategically open to avoid tipping the organization's hand before a convenient announcement. Evaluatively open. The decision has not been made. The conclusion has not been reached. The variables that will ultimately determine which quarterback walks out of training camp as the Cleveland Browns' starting quarterback extend well beyond what is surfaced in the limited public view. This is the point where the analytical work becomes essential, because if the head coach with the full evaluative picture determines that both quarterbacks are at a legitimate starting caliber, if both players have answered the performance question at the required standard, then the question that determines everything is no longer a performance question. Both players have met Monken's own formulation of the performance threshold. Both are capable. Both are starter caliber. Both have done enough to qualify as viable options. What decides everything now is organizational logic, and the answer to the organizational logic question is not close. Let's be completely honest about what Deshaun Watson currently represents within the Cleveland Browns organization. Not sentimentally, not through the lens of what Watson was when he left Houston, or what his prime suggested about his talent and potential. Honestly, Watson is not this team's long-term quarterback, and anyone willing to look at the facts and the organizational direction without the comfort of familiar framing can see that clearly. His performance history since leaving Houston does not require insider knowledge or leaked internal evaluations to assess. The outcomes are public record. They consistently and repeatedly point away from a legitimate long-term competitive foundation. his contract situation, the organizational direction being set by general manager Andrew Berry, and the roster composition being assembled around this quarterback competition all point to the same conclusion. Watson is functioning as a transitional figure in this building, not the quarterback around whom a long-term competitive identity is being constructed. Nothing compounds when Watson starts in 2026. Nothing builds chemistry that deepens across multiple seasons. Nothing produces a player whose ceiling sits dramatically higher than what Watson is currently showing. Starting Watson is a direct trade, present tense management at the direct expense of future tense development. And in an organization that is publicly committed to building a younger roster with long-term competitive sustainability as the stated goal, that trade moves the franchise in the opposite direction of where it is said it is trying to go.
Starting the transitional veteran over the ascending young talent when both have been assessed as starter-caliber options is not just a missed opportunity, it is an active organizational decision to decelerate the very progress the franchise is committed to making. Every day that Shedeur Sanders is not taking live regular season snaps is a day of development that cannot be recovered, replicated in practice, or replaced by any amount of preparation time. The football intelligence that only builds through live game experience, reading defenses in real time with actual consequences attached to every decision, processing coverage rotations at NFL speed against players whose entire job is to deceive the passer, developing the automatic reactions that only become automatic after genuine high-stakes exposure. That can only be built one way. There is no shortcut. There is no practice substitute. Every mistake Shedeur makes in a meaningful game setting that gets studied, corrected, and incorporated into his expanding understanding of what NFL defenses will present to him makes him more complete as a quarterback. That is the cycle that turns talented young quarterbacks into the kind of players teams build around for years. And if the organizational math is genuinely clear, if both players are performing at a starting level and Watson is unquestionably not the long-term answer, then the risk calculation of starting Shedeur is not nearly as steep as the comfort level with the familiar veteran choice might make it feel in the moment. Yes, there is a learning curve. It is real. Every quarterback who starts for the first time in the National Football League on a full-time basis encounters it. There will be moments where the absence of regular season experience shows. There will be plays where the same processing speed that produced the Isaiah Bond touchdown in training camp runs into a defensive wrinkle that the regular season presents in a way that training camp simply cannot fully replicate. Those moments will happen, but the benefits of starting Shedeur, a complete season of accelerated development for a player whose trajectory points directly towards sustained excellence, outweigh the drawbacks of a learning curve that every young starting quarterback faces eventually, regardless of how long they sit on a bench, waiting for a turn that may never be optimal. The math points one direction. The organizational logic points to the same place. Both roads arrive at the same destination. Shedeur Sanders should be the starter. Now, let's address something that has been consistently overlooked and consistently undervalued in the broader discourse around Shedeur Sanders in this Cleveland Browns quarterback competition. Today, Coach Monken talked about his encounter with Deion Sanders, and what Monken's description of that meeting reveals about the real dynamic between the Sanders family and this coaching staff is something that the cynical framing of Coach Prime's role in his son's professional career has never once been willing to honestly acknowledge. Monken made it clear he genuinely admires Deion Sanders, not as a celebrity, not as a television personality or entertainment figure whose presence needs to be diplomatically managed, as a football mind, as a competitor. He said he was genuinely excited to meet him, and when Coach Prime indicated he was planning to visit but had a prior business commitment, Monken's response was not frustration, not eye-rolling tolerance of a high-profile intrusion into his program. His response was an open invitation. Tell me where the next shoot is, and I'll show up. That is the language of a head coach who views a player's famous father as a problem requiring damage control. That is the vocabulary of a football man who actively seeks out a genuine connection with another football mind he actually respects. That matters enormously because the story that certain voices have been pushing about Coach Prime's involvement in Shedeur's professional career frames it as a liability at best and an active complication at worst. According to that narrative, Deion's presence creates distraction, generates organizational friction, and forces NFL teams to manage an unwanted family dynamic along with everything else that goes into developing a young quarterback. The implication is that authentic NFL coaches see the Sanders family dynamic as something that requires containment, that Deion's involvement somehow clouds or restricts Shedeur's straightforward professional development. Monken just took that narrative apart in public. He's not the first. Weeks ago, Deion Sanders himself described his conversation with the coaching staff with the kind of respect that comes from a genuine football person recognizing another at the top level of the sport. Now, Monken is publicly expressing his own sincere gratitude for the chance to connect with Coach Prime. Both of those exchanges paint the same picture: mutual respect between people who understand the game at a deep level, built on the substance of what Deion Sanders actually represents, rather than on his celebrity, his persona, or the entertainment value of the Coach Prime brand.
Think about what Deion Sanders actually is. He is one of the most decorated players in the history of professional football, a Hall of Famer, a man who competed at the absolute pinnacle of professional athletics for more than a decade under the most intense scrutiny and the highest possible stakes. When he speaks about what it takes to perform at the top level, about development, about preparation, about the mental and physical demands of professional competition, he speaks from a depth of personal experience that almost no living person can match. He adds a dimension to this conversation that very few people can add. When head coaches talk about him with the same kind of genuine regard that Monken expressed today, they are not being polite. They are identifying something real. The foundation of the Sanders family's relationship with the Cleveland Browns coaching staff is not managed conflict or calculated tolerance of a prominent family name. It is genuine, mutual respect between football people who recognize each other's seriousness, and that matters for Shedeur's development in ways that extend well beyond the public conversation. A coaching staff that truly respects a young quarterback's complete identity, his background, his family, his formation, invests in his success with authenticity. They are not performing engagements while privately managing a situation they would rather not deal with. They are all in. And a young quarterback developing inside that kind of environment, genuine buy-in, sincere investment, mutual respect across every layer of the relationship, does not just develop at a normal pace, he accelerates, because the entire context surrounding his daily work is working with him, not around him. Now let's step back, look at everything that came out of Cleveland today as a single coherent picture, because the pieces matter individually, but when they are honestly assembled together with clear eyes and real analytical commitments, they tell a story that the loudest parts of the mainstream narrative have been working very hard to obscure. Shedeur Sanders threw 3 touchdown passes against 0 interceptions in a competitive practice session that was recorded on camera. One of those passes, the touchdown to Isaiah Bond, was among the most technically precise throws produced during this entire competition. The delivery was perfectly timed, perfectly placed, and required a level of anticipatory processing that benchmarks directly against the best quarterback play in professional football. Bond did not have to fight for that football. When he turned around, it was already exactly where it needed to be. That throw does not come from a player who is years away from contributing at the professional level. It comes from a quarterback who is already performing at an advanced mechanical and cognitive level in high-pressure moments. The outside world is not seeing the complete picture of this competition. Monken said that directly, publicly, and on the record. Every narrative constructed on the partial view the public has access to, every confident media declaration about Watson's advantage, every suggestion that the door is mostly or entirely closed for Shedeur, was built on a foundation that the head coach just told everyone is incomplete. Using the complete evaluative picture that only he and his staff can access, Monken described both quarterbacks in this competition as starter caliber. Not a starter and a developmental project, not a front runner and a capable backup.
Two genuine starter-caliber options for an NFL offense. The person with all the information is telling you the competition is truly open, no decision made, evaluations still active, variables still in play that go far beyond what the public has been shown.
Monken did not display polite tolerance of an uncomfortable family situation when he talked about Deion Sanders. He expressed genuine, unmistakable excitement about meeting him, sincere respect from one football person to another. The cynical narrative that has been trying to frame Coach Prime's involvement as a complication is not supported by a single thing that Monken or his staff has actually said or done in observable reality. Add it all together, the touchdown performance, the bond throw, Shedeur's description of his coaching relationship, and the discipline that collect Monken's confirmation that the external view is incomplete, the two starter-caliber quarterbacks framing that makes the organizational logic overwhelmingly point toward the young, ascending talent over the transitional veteran. The genuine mutual respect between the Sanders family and the coaching staff, creating an environment where development accelerates rather than stalls. It produces a clear result, if you're looking at it honestly, with real organizational thinking rather than comfort with the familiar veteran option. The quarterback this team needs to be building around is Shedeur Sanders. The competition is real and ongoing, Monken made that clear, but the evidence is accumulating with every throw, every drill, and every piece of coaching language that comes out of that building toward a conclusion that becomes harder to argue against the more honestly and completely the full picture gets examined. Today was a significant day because the performance, the organizational logic, and the coaching framing all pointed in exactly the same direction at the same time. The gap between what the evidence is showing and what the dominant narrative has been promoting is narrowing. And when reality fully catches up to the story being told, it will not be a subtle correction. Shedeur Sanders answered the question today about whether he has the ability to be the quarterback this team relies on. He answered it with a touchdown pass that arrived in Isaiah Bond's chest without causing Bond to break stride by a single step. The question now is whether the organization has the conviction to act on what the evidence is plainly showing, before the window to make that choice with the greatest developmental upside starts closing. The conversation is just getting started.